keeping with the fact that we're streaming this and there might be someone out watching this particular session, I'm going to go ahead and start on time, and we may have some folks join us. You know, I like to start my presentations with a disclaimer that there are some things I'm good at, and this is not one of them. So I'm gonna. What's going to happen is I solicited the help from a couple of really smart people at the University of Texas, which is there in Austin, to help me understand these numbers. And so I'm going to be referring to my notes probably an awful lot more than I should in this presentation. But the title of this breakout session was, of course, getting electric training off the ground. But what this is really all about is it's a kind of a discussion, and we get, given the size of the group, this can turn into a discussion anytime you're ready, on the progress we've made over, the industry's made over the last 5 years or so, the current state of the technology, and the likelihood of any of us seeing electric training aircraft in general use over the next 10 years. Before I get into that, though, I thought I might abuse my time just for a few minutes to tell you about a new company that I'm starting, and I'm looking for investors. And since you all look like you're all pretty prosperous, I think this is the right time to talk to them about. I know you'll be interested in this. I've decided to design and build an airplane powered entirely by steam. The target market for this aircraft is flight schools and any pilots looking to avoid the high cost of avgas by chopping their own wood. And while I know that wood is a fossil fuel, at least it's not leaded, so we've got that going for us, and it's thereby greener than your Lycon. I mean, sort of. And yes, steam can spin a propeller, so no questions about that. So now we're still a few years from building my conforming prototype on this, but I can show you a picture of it. And now, to be totally above board, this is not an actual photograph of the airplane. It is a computer-generated rendering, but it's very close to what we intend to do. So, our ideal investor must have an insatiable appetite for socially responsible nonsense, and too polite to wonder out loud how long it takes to get the boiler up to start spinning the propeller. So I'll send you all an email with my address. Please send me your checks.
Jerry, only if you form a SPAC.
SPAC is my plan B.
If you go with just a public offering, and have to conform to SEC rules, no way will do it. But a SPAC, it'll work.
So you guys don't want to miss out on this.
Okay.
Not in this So if you think this idea is really just too stupid for anyone to invest in, then you really haven't been following what's been happening for a while with electric aircraft. There are big companies involved in this, but for the most part, this is an investor-targeted fraud. Not unlike the Theranos mess. If you remember Theranos, this was a technology that was never going to come to market. And certainly at some point along the way in collecting dollars, the people that were developing and knew it was never going to come to market. And they collected and dispersed money anyway. Of course, there's lots of bad ideas. I mean, think timeshares for just a second. But what Theranos and electric aircraft, what has set them apart from a lot of other really bad ideas, is besides gathering and dispersing millions of other people's money, they've managed somehow to avoid even a cursory level of scrutiny or skeptical review. And you just don't see very much skeptical review of this. You see reprints of press releases for the most part, and that's what you're seeing, and that's where it stops. Now, before I go on, I'm going to make a small confession here. About 8 or 9 years ago, I invested a substantial amount of money in a company that was developing an electric aircraft. They promised at the time to have a prototype up and flying within 2 to 3 years. That didn't happen. 5 years go by, and they've hung an electric motor on somebody else's kit airplane and hauled it around to Oshkosh and Sun and Fun and so on and so forth. And in a shockingly successful effort to collect more dollars for the company. And now 9 or 10 years have gone by, and that company is rumored to be in the process of building a conforming prototype, they say. But no one's seen it, and they're not letting you know. I invested this money because I believed in this was a solution to the direction we're taking now, which is, of course, eliminating leaded fuel. And because I also wanted to position Redbird as the go-to company for training in such aircraft, this type of aircraft. And while this company has been hopeless at building airplanes, they're absolute savants at producing press releases. I mean, coming out at an average about one a week, and 1/3 of them is, we've selected this particular vendor for our airplane, or this university is just ordered a bunch of them, or here's our future versions of this aircraft. Now, the university thing, the customer thing, is kind of a mystery to me, especially the universities that have big flight programs, because beyond the obvious social credits the university gets for ordering these electric airplanes, one has to wonder what type of spreadsheet gymnastics they had to go through to make sense out of a fleet that was a half or maybe 2/3 larger than we're currently got. And I will explain why that's the case here in just a minute. So, let's begin here. Question number one is, do electric airplanes fly? Yes, they fly. They've been flying since the 1970s. Because if you spin a propeller fast enough, whether you're using gasoline or electricity or a giant rubber band that you twisted a whole lot of times, you'll create enough thrust to get a small airplane off the ground. That fatal flaw, that single thing that's standing in the way of effective use of these aircraft is very well understood. So, to explain that, let's play a little game, all right? Now, look at these pictures here, and tell me which of these 4 things does not belong. 3 things belong together, 1 of them doesn't. Anyone?
The steering wheel.
Pete?
Sure.
The steering wheel. That's correct. It's the steering wheel, because all of the things in this picture have the ability to store energy and release it on demand to spin the propeller on an airplane, whether that's a Cessna 172 or a Sonex Electric or a Gosford Condor, where you have to actually pedal to get the propeller to go. The amount of energy that can be stored and released on command, be it a battery or gas or a twisted rubber band or legs or anything else, is known as specific energy. And in this case, specific energy is simply the result of a formula that says, depending on what kind of energy you're releasing, kilowatt hours divided by the mass of whatever is storing your energy. That means that the higher the specific energy number, the more energy you get out of that storage container. And this is the fatal flaw I mentioned earlier. Gasoline and internal combustion engines are ideal for creating thrust using a propeller. And as you can see from this chart here, that gasoline and the other petroleum fuels are the most efficient way to store energy. Hydrogen is a little more efficient, and it certainly has more potential, but we're not using that today. So if we talk about petroleum fuels, and in the case of gasoline, has a specific energy of 47. That means that for every, the specific energy is 47 times the mass. The other interesting thing about gasoline is it actually has a potential energy of about 102, meaning that theoretically, if everything was perfect, and it never will, okay, but theoretically, we could take that number to 102 under circumstances. Here is lithium-ion battery, to give you some idea, which has a specific energy of 1. And to boot, it is just about at its theoretical limit for lithium-ion battery. In case any of you were still stuck on what a great idea steam would be, here's wood, and it has a specific energy of 60. Let me just throw that out. Wood has more energy stored in it than a lithium-ion battery. Well, what makes lithium-ion batteries work, of course, is make more and more efficient use of the energy we have. Yeah.
So this chart here is telling us that fat is more efficient than a lithium-ion battery.
Well, efficiency is not probably the right word in this case. It is. Okay. It is how much energy can be released on command divided by the mass of wherever that energy is.
Okay.
Efficiency may not be the right term in the case.
So this table is saying that battery-powered airplanes is impossible.
No, they're not impossible. They're obviously they're fine.
Well, efficient battery-powered airplanes right now is impossible.
No, they're not impossible. I'll show you why they're possible. This is really more a discussion of are we going to get what we're being sold in terms of their potential. So the
Hey, Jerry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just that point on fat. If you think about burning fat, which is just to relate to what we're trying to do on turbine fuel, you can burn fat.
right.
And it really, so you can see how SAF, that's only one of the many feedstocks that we throw in there, but you can see kind of the thing behind the idea. It's close to kerosene there, and why it can be used as a substitute when you do other things to it.
Right.
But just your point on that actually, that's one of the feedstocks.
Right. Now, efficiency is really more a matter of how efficiently whatever engine you're using is using that energy. So, metabolizing fat and turning propeller, it's pretty low efficiency. I mean, it takes a long time to metabolize fat. You'd probably be better off just See, and this is a growing time for me, not saying that the first thing that's on my mind. So, let me put this another way in terms of storage. 10 pounds of battery, and this is really important. Obviously electric airplanes fly, but 10 pounds of battery store 1,200 watt-hours of power, of electricity, or energy. But 10 pounds of gasoline, 1.66 gallons, 1 2/3 gallons, 100 low lead contains 48,000 watt-hours of energy. So, yes, it works, and it's a bad idea. Okay, so let's look at this in real world terms. We'll use a Cessna aircraft, which is, you like my little stickman, guys? I did that myself. So let's look at this in real world. We use a Cessna 172 for this comparison because that's the performance specs on a 172 are very well known, and it represents kind of the optimal training platform for most cases. The fuel capacity on 172 is 56 gallons, weighing 336 pounds. Its engine, the IO360, weighs about 260 pounds. Okay. And cruising at 75% power, we can fly for about 5 hours in this aircraft. And under those conditions, we have about 500 pounds of useful load. So 3 medium-sized people in the airplane with no bags. Now, if we replace the avgas and the Lycoming engine with 550 pounds of fully charged batteries and a 50-pound electric motor, our cruise to exhaustion drops to 1 hour and 20 minutes. Not terrible, obviously, for most training scenarios, but that 80 minutes assumes that we are not flying at night, The temperature is not dropping as we climb. We're keeping our radio transmissions to a minimum. And the airplane is not booked for at least 2 hours after we get back. Because it's going to take that long to recharge the batteries. And that takes us off on a whole different tangent, which we're not going to talk about, and that's asset utilization in this case, or why at flight school we need an awful lot of money. That's a big problem. Oh yes, and one other thing. We're not flying anywhere north of Missouri from November to March every year because we may freeze to death. So before I get into this, there's a whole part about the other things that engines do for us. We need to, if we, for example, we needed to carry a fourth person on a 172, we reduce the fuel. If we need to carry a third or fourth passenger on an electric 172, we don't go because you can't reduce the fuel load, no matter what the conditions of the particular battery. So picture for a moment that you're flying in North Dakota in winter. And according to a Forbes article from March of last year, the batteries, we're going to use Tesla batteries as an example because, and I'll explain why in just a second, the batteries in a Tesla automobile lose about 30% of their range once the temperature nears 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So that 80-minute flight time goes down to 56 minutes, assuming you don't attempt to heat the cabin. Barely enough time to complete a flight lesson, but plenty of time to get a raging case of frostbite. So inside the batteries themselves, we're looking at whether the battery is charging or it's not, or it's spending energy. What you've got is ions that are traveling through this. Ions are traveling between the positive and negative electrodes through a liquid electrolyte. And as it gets colder, that electrolyte gets thicker. And as it gets thicker, we'll get less energy out of that. The resistance goes way up, and the ions move more slowly. And as resistance goes up, faster you lose power. To deal with this, you have to keep the battery warm somehow. Guess how you keep the battery warm? With the battery. Exactly right. So a study of 5 electric vehicles that the American Automotive Association found that high temperatures also cut in battery range. They tested the BMW i3s, the Volt, right? The Chevrolet Volt and the Nissan Leaf, and the Tesla models, and all have a range. All of them, they were selected because they have a range of at least 100 miles. I think the Leaf is probably the one with the least range on it. And they tested these cars on a dynamometer, which is basically a treadmill for a car, where they can control the climate. And the cars were tested at 20 degrees and at 95 degrees. And they compared the range to earlier testing, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. At 20 degrees, the average driving range fell by 12% when the car's cabin heater was not turned on. When it was turned on, it dropped by 41%. At 95 degrees, which is really hot, the range dropped by 4% unless you use the air conditioner, and then it dropped by 17%. So it's bad news going either way on that particular. The testers determined that the Tesla range, when it was fully charged at 75 degrees, the range of that car was 239 miles on a particular model they were testing. But it fell 91 miles, or 38% at 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is a really sloppy way to estimate what's going on in the airplane. I agree. Except that the electric airplane manufacturers are not sharing this data. So the cars are the only thing we've got. We should assume, of course, that power storage systems will improve over time, but for airplanes at least, it's going to have to be something other than lithium-ion batteries. Energy density in these batteries, as I told you earlier, has nearly reached its theoretical limit, which means that more storage only comes with bigger and heavier packages. So everything you've seen from Tesla and car manufacturers about longer and longer range is the direct effect of adding bigger, heavier batteries. And big batteries in cars, up to a point, doesn't matter very much, but it does nothing to improve. And the interesting thing about that also is it doesn't follow, and this is really the important part, because this is where the lie really turns into the big lie. And that is that if you can make a Tesla go farther by adding a bigger, heavier battery, because the batteries aren't getting more efficient, they're just bigger batteries store more. Doesn't the same thing hold true? Like, just add bigger batteries to the airplanes. Wrong. Because what happens in an airplane is, this is my very slide. I had all of these in a number chart, and I even couldn't remember how it worked. But let me explain to you what we're showing here. We have a battery load required axis going this way, and a gross weight and cruising altitude axis going this way. And what happens is we can stay under, if you assume that an hour, 80 minutes is okay, you can stay under the gross weight requirement of a small airplane like 172. But before you even get to a King Air size airplane, you're already putting more battery on it than the airplane can lift. In other words, your batteries will take it, even to get it off the ground, your batteries will take more mass and exceed the gross weight of that particular airplane. So this thing goes into infinity. And that assumes, right, that you're not doing anything like pressurizing the cabin at 35,000 feet or trying to keep people from dying from hypothermia. Because at a minus, at 35,000 feet as an example, it's about minus 30 centigrade. The batteries will stop working and people will freeze to death unless you're consuming battery time. This is even a dumb assumption because it's not going to get off the ground anyway, but you aren't going to be able to keep things warm enough to keep on working. So how long will it take before we have a workable storage solution? I mean, one that won't irradiate the passengers when you fly. And because a nuclear fusion will actually has a very high energy, specific energy, and that would work fine if you could get a reactor. As we look at this and we look at the technology, the question really is let's assume that the day you build an aircraft, you don't have to go through the FAA. They can just start using it. Right? So let's forget all about all that lead time it takes before you can certify an aircraft. The best estimates are, with the feeling of essentially the experts in this area, will we have a solution within the 5 years? And the answer is that's possible. After 10 years, maybe, and never is also a possibility. We will never have the energy density we need for aircraft like this. But this is not what's being sold. And the shame here is that the people writing these press releases, making these promises about capability and delivery dates, and that saying about, don't say anything bad about anybody until you walk a mile in their shoes, and that's because when you do say something bad about them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. But in this case, these are investor driven. These are investor targeted lies that these companies are telling us about. Now, for the Boeings and the Airbuses and these deep pocket companies, the cost of funding this research doesn't move the needle. It's fine. It's well worth the PR alone. And all the research that's being done around this is about making more efficient motors, which is great, more aerodynamic airplanes, which is great, and training institutions that indicate an interest or place orders, I guess. We don't even really know what that means in this case. I would chalk this up to a combination of wishful thinking and an honest interest in the preservation of the environment. For the rest of those the rest of those tapping investors that will never see their money returned, I take it that the guys that are doing this don't believe in karma, and karma is a bitch, I'm telling you, especially for these guys. So, before I take any questions, I'll just sum up by saying, as long as there are investors out there willing to drop millions on electric, I'd say my chances of getting a Ferrari are really good. Steam is not a better idea, but it's not much worse. That's our take. So, if you guys would like me to get more specific about the numbers, I can do that. Or we can talk about it. Do you have any other questions about where this particular business is going? If you're considering ordering an electric aircraft for your training, there are some electric aircraft. Pipistrel, I think, has one. It's good for a little less than an hour of training time. It has been certified by EASA. The FAA hasn't certified it. Somebody told me today that that's in the works. I think the best equation you can use when understanding that investment is the asset utilization model for an airplane like that. If it's going to be in the air for an hour, how long is it going to be on the ground afterwards? I look at one of my favorite example schools is University of North Dakota. They're operating 127 planes. They are absolute machines when it comes to turning that asset. The airplanes come in, the instructor and the student practically bump into each other, swapping the plane. The fuel truck's already there in 15 minutes of ready. So that's an example of an organization that would have to go to maybe 180 or 200 aircraft to keep this kind of process going. Yes?
Respectfully on that, I agree if that's a non-removable battery. We're starting to see some of that change in the Formula E, I think it is, where it's no longer two cars they drive, it's one car that they come in, switch the battery, and go. Not unlike what the kids do.
Right.
But that's still, to your point, it's not a 15-minute turnaround, it's a half-hour turnaround, it's an hour turnaround. Changing subjects, what do you think of the theory that I've heard that the Boeing, the Airbus, and others that are looking towards electric really are not looking at as electric nearly as much as autonomous, so that the consumer starts to feel autonomy or autonomous vehicles are safe if it starts with the Ubers, and then, oh gosh, you're doing it there, we can do it with a 797.
I'm so glad we met before this so you could ask me that. Because I touched on that subject in an article recently. It was in AOPA Pilot called Can a Computer Think Like a Pilot? And the answer is, as you might imagine, no, it can't. And I'll give you a very brief scenario to help explain. Imagine you're a programmer and you designed a program that will drive your car from Austin to College Station. And you've got, what you've been able to acquire is the fastest, smartest computer ever made. And you're the greatest programmer that has ever lived. And you've got this really great car. And it's about midnight and you're done with the code. And you load it out of the car. And then you climb in the back seat of the car and you tell the computer to drive it. Somewhere outside of the town of Old Dimebox, which is a real town in Texas, some highwaymen have taken plastic cones and put them on the road. And they put them on the road also in the median. Now your computer knows that it's okay to drive in the right lane. It's sometimes okay to drive in the median area if you need to make a turn. So special rules for that. But you never drive over on the other side, ever. And so the car comes to a stop when it comes to the cones. And there it sits. And you look in the mirror, and there's 5 guys with clubs coming out of the bushes next to the road to rob you and maybe kill you. Right? Right. Now, Here's the good news. You didn't take the steering wheel or the gas pedal out of this car because you're going to do something your computer could never do. And that is, you're going to jump in the front seat and you're going to drive over the cones, which you know are little just plastic, nothing much to them, okay? And you're going to drive away and leave these guys go. Your ability to ad-lib is fundamental to successfully driving the car every time you get in it and flying your airplane every time you climb into the airplane. Because the ability to ad-lib is fundamentally integral to consciousness, which, by the way, we still don't understand. For instance, where do ideas really come from? If you can't tell me where ideas really come from, I can't convert that into a program that actually works that way. So this is one of those cases where your computer is going to get you killed. And that's why you can't ever have full
So you and I are on the same page.
Okay.
I am not an advocate for that at all.
See, that's why we talk about
No, I totally agree. I do, however, see the path towards a single cockpit airliner by way of, well, look, everybody's used to doing it in these things like taxis.
Yeah.
We're just doing it here.
Yeah, I don't think I fly citation single pilot all the time. I don't have that problem. And I can't imagine a situation where a person on the ground is monitoring what the airplane is doing in real time. But to understand where, and I use the word ad-lib, but you can call it whatever you want, the ability to, see, one of the things that computers are really bad at, and I know this from many years of programming, is they are not very good at generalizing what they learn. In other words, you can put a computer in a situation that it might have a solution for, but it doesn't look, or you can program a solution for it, but it doesn't look at the experience it just had and is able to apply it generally to anything that varies from that problem at all, and actually execute on it. That's just not something that they're able to do, and you can't possibly program for everything in any of these.
My only point to this was, and I'm sorry to derail it. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
was I really do wonder if the biggest companies are using the electric autonomous as a shill to get to autonomous. Forget the electric.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
Well, I could just a quick follow up on that. You're talking about some helping control an aircraft from the ground, but what about then you have cybersecurity situations that you could hijack an airplane from the ground,
right?
You know, or not just that, but lose connection with it. Then you don't have the mythical two pilots.
Oh, that's exactly right. And you know, let's call artificial intelligence what it is. Artificial intelligence is efficiency optimization, from the standpoint that even what they call a learning computer is essentially what we've got a question and we've got a correct answer, and we're essentially layering virtual neurons within the program that provide that by following these paths to the answer, whether they're right or wrong, and they mostly come out wrong, until they happen to set the hierarchy of passing information in the correct order to get to the correct answer. And that's what learning is for a computer. So it's optimization. Right? It's like logistics optimization. We don't know how people learn, but we're real sure that ain't it. You know, we're positive that that's not how it's done. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to try to bring you back to subject at hand.
Okay.
But by the way, just remember, we just certified.
Start me off on another topic
I really like. A piece of equipment.
Okay.
A non-pilot can push in an emergency to get their bus safely on the ground.
Right.
Not knowing anything about flying. So I just want to leave it at that. So back to subject at hand. So let's, because this man helped me get that across the goal line for Garmin.
Okay.
And that's why we want to call you. Mm-hmm. So now let's take a hydrogen fuel cell and put it in your equation.
Okay.
A hydrogen fuel cell, the actual container for the gaseous hydrogen. I'm not going to burn it.
Okay.
Gaseous hydrogen in a fuel cell configuration to be able in the powertrain to be able to power electric motor.
Okay.
And now you're reducing that battery rate. When you start to introduce that, have you done the calculations to be able to see what kind of efficiencies we can get through that process, which many of these companies have turned to very rapidly, realizing exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, and the answer is no, we didn't. We were just looking at what was currently being. We do know that they have a very, very high potential, and they actually could be the replacement. We're going to have to get there. If you're talking about the standard hydrogen fuel cell that's actually generating electricity, I don't know as much about that topic. I do know that getting the kilowatt hours that you need out for the propeller is not as high yet, but it's coming. It's coming. But the answer is no. But that's what we have on the chart, that it is by far the highest potential. I don't really, maybe you guys know, what is the, what are the limiting factors?
Well, it's much smarter than I am, but we're not talking about burning, because when you burn
I understand.
and that's why at the top of your chart, it is very efficient, but now you got to cryogenically cool it, there's all kinds of you got to worry about.
Right.
But when we're talking about using hydrogen across that barrier to be able then to produce electrons that come out as you distribute the protons and everything like that, you're able to generate electricity, but then now you go into a very efficient electric motor. We're never going to get to the level of burning dinosaurs. We all accept it. We're not going to get to that level. But politically, if you can't fly a carbon-burning vehicle in Norwegian airspace, eventually you have to have another solution. And the other thing that I would argue with you, Jerry, is that if you have a hybrid solution now on a regional type of size aircraft, what GE and Rolls-Royce and Pratt have all discovered is with that spinning turbine out there, you can produce an incredible amount of electricity at very cheap. And if you can shield properly, you can augment thrust in some very creative ways. Once you get up to altitude, you can do a lot of neat stuff with thrust augmentation with electrics that provide you an additional capability that we perhaps didn't have before. That's really where I believe they're really focusing there.
So you're talking about generating and expending the electricity at the same time?
You're generating off the turbine.
But you're not storing it first. It's going right to whatever you're trying. Okay, that makes sense.
So, you want to add?
I was just going to say, we talked about the importance of the efficiency of converting the energy source into thrust. So, our compression ignition engines are not the most efficient at converting, but the energy storage of our fuel is very, very high. So when we talk about the formula for hydrogen going through a fuel cell, I think what we're seeing with the technology being developed, some of the math is going to be shifting. We have a much more dense energy being stored in the hydrogen, but a less efficient fuel cell in terms of converting that into the electricity. In the end, is there going to be something that balances out that would be, a good, efficient, or viable thrust for an airplane? It goes back to how much power do you need for what range. It comes back to the mission. And so I think for certain range of mission, just like we see with electric airplanes today, even battery power, a short-range mission airplane might have a viable electric power source. As we look at things that are going to be longer range, we're looking at other balances of how that can be put together in a way that's viable. And we're seeing a lot of that development across the field. And so Pete's mentioning some that we're looking at the higher end in terms of higher weight, but higher range, more range. And where does that become efficient and maybe balance out to something that might be viable?
Well, it's an absurd example of the problems with going to bigger and bigger airplanes. Because we can make a 747, as an example, go around the world 4 times without refueling if we put big enough fuel tanks on it, but you won't be able to get it off the ground. And this is because there is such a loss of efficiency in specific energy with batteries. This is kind of multiplied off in the other direction. So I am going to go back out and I'm going to go get a primer on hydrogen and see where we're at. then of course the question always is if this is your power source, what does the FAA have to say about it? You know, those kinds of things. You know, lithium-ion batteries are pretty safe, but they are prone to damage, and when they get damaged, they catch light. So they're small. So is gasoline. So I don't consider that a big deal. But that's kind of where we are. So it's 5. Is it 5:30? Just got to put my glass on to a time. So, we got a few minutes. Any other questions, comments? Anybody want to argue with me?
Could solar power help augment any of this? Like your example of not flying at night, turning the radios off, I get it. Mm-hmm. You know, but in the daytime, couldn't solar power the radios even?
The most efficient solar cells that you can put on any surface right now are 21% efficient. So they never generate enough electricity. They will lengthen the battery life a little bit. You know, when Vi Aviation first introduced the electric flyer and the long diatribe of lies all along the way. Oh, did I say that? They had put solar cells on the surface of the wing. And I think the assumption that most people had was, well, this is going to generate electricity. All it did was, if you left it on a ramp all day, it would charge. That was an all day maybe. That's not, that's solar cells. It's kind of, and solar cells get more efficient, but they're not twice as efficient as they were 12 years ago. We're kind of, I guess maybe.
So it could help top off the batteries while it's on the ground.
I mean, nobody wants to argue with me.
This presentation started. I think the questions you're asking are different than the questions we should be asking. I don't disagree with you.
Oh, that could be very good. What are the questions?
Well, so we represent the we mentioned a couple years ago in Colorado. Back then we didn't represent it.
The E-Flyer was there?
The E-Flyer was there in Denver. Yeah. So we sell 4 different models of electric aircraft, and they're very purpose-built. So it's not a question of comparing it to 172 because it's not a one-to-one replacement of a 172 at this point in time. It's a specific mission replacement, which is right now if you were to take the Velis, which has temperature-controlled batteries for the very purpose with liquid cooling / heating. It's designed as a traffic pattern trainer with the range limitations and the charging limitations.
Sure.
And the flight schools we are selling to, among them possibly UND actually, understand that there is a recharge time associated with that. So your cycle of the product is going to be different. So again, it's not a one-to-one replacement. So it is different questions. And then the other part, of course, hydrogen is coming for commercial aircraft, and the specific energy of hydrogen is great. You have volume issues, though, so that the shapes of the aircraft need to be different than we currently have. But the interim is going to be a hybrid, at least if you want to get to a 172 specific, is going to be a hybrid with gas and electric.
Right.
With you mentioned the BMW i3, which had a option at the time it was sold of a generator essentially, which took gasoline and turned it into electricity to recharge the batteries. And so we flight tested the Panthera this year with the hybrid gas electric technology, and flight tested that exceptionally well. And so that'll fill the gap between the two. And the automotive industry did that. Obviously, I mentioned the i3, but also the Toyota Prius kind of started that revolution in the electric car industry. So,
but a Prius is not an airplane. Let me give you a counter-argument to that. I have real cognitive dissonance around the notion that you would take half of the useful load and put it into a medium that was only storing at a rate of 1, but against 47. So why would you commit half of your fuel to a battery that was so inefficient at the cost of getting rid of some of your gas? And for mission specific is right. Traffic pattern stuff is terrific. I'm a little bit, I suppose, as engines get more computer controls, flying a gas engine, flying electric is going to be about the same, in those terms. But I wonder how the transition goes. The whole notion of latent delivery of power and all those other issues. We are. So tell us what what the time in flight, what the usable time?
Yes, you got it about right. And in the picture you showed the Perpetual Alpha electrode, which was a 2014 release. Since then, in 2020, we did certify under the OPSA regulations, the Velis, which was pretty much the same airframe, but we changed the battery system significantly. But because I was certified in 2020, I was based off of 2018 battery technology. And we're still selling that model. In fact, we'll welcome you to come fly the aircraft if you're interested in doing that.
Yeah.
Everyone's working on next generation products. We haven't announced anything. Some of our competitors have put press releases, as you said. We are working behind the scenes, and typically we release a press release when we actually release an aircraft. So I can tell you that the next generations of products are quite exciting, even in pure electric form, in terms of the increased range.
Yeah, I'm going to get somebody to sit me down and explain to me why adding batteries, etc.
Going back to that.
Going back to the hybrid option.
A couple of reasons. One is we know that airports have been closed for noise abatement reasons. So the Panthera, for example, in a hybrid reason, can take off on full electric, and then you can engage the gas engine. In Europe, that's a bigger issue than it is here in the United States. But that's one thing. Another thing with the Panthera, it's a twin engine with one propeller. So if you're a 4-cylinder gas engine through a rod or something like that, you could just engage it and run off of electric for a little bit. So you have a twin without the asymmetrical thrust. Again, your time on that battery would be limited, but it would get you to a safe place to land. And then your overall fuel efficiency would be increasing.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's not for everyone, and it is still an emerging technology, but it is coming through. And we won't sell lots of the hybrid Pantheras, but we will sell some, and that'll get us to the next generation.
And what's the price tag?
Probably around 1.2, 1.4, somewhere like that. We haven't sold any hybrid.
1.4 what?
No.
Flight school's going to find
Well, the Panthera is not a flight training aircraft. The Velis is a flight school aircraft, which is 2.
Here I am without my checkbook. So anyway, let's go drink. And if anybody else would like, I'd love to talk to you about it. So thank you all.
Thank you.